Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. I said a podcast. It's always great to have you with us. We got a full house today again. Dale, where are you? You're off in travel somewhere.
Yeah, I think I'm what's called the East Midlands. Martin will probably correct me, but in I wouldn't say little town. This is a little city, perhaps. I don't even know. Derby. It's an interesting place. Interesting place. I haven't frequented much of it yet, but yeah, sitting here in a hotel room, joining you all for another amazing episode.
Awesome. Martin, how are you, sir?
Yeah, good, thanks. And yourself?
I'm getting there. We had a long weekend in Australia, so I'm just recovering. Something about a long weekend, we have to drink more. I don't know why, but we do. And let's welcome our guest as well, Mr. Nick Fewings. How are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed. Yeah.
You had a great story. You had a great story before we press record, but maybe we'll save it for later. That was awesome. I loved it. But I love this topic too because, you know, Dale and I talk about people a lot when it comes to projects, and I think you are an authority, or at least you've been speaking at all sorts of conferences, particularly APM, and we're talking about that just before the button was pressed. But high performance, and I want to get a baseline here because, again, as Dale and I and Martin do, we are aware of our own idiocies and our understandings of definitions like high performing. And it was, I think, a bit of a buzzword when I was embedded in projects. It was a thing that big managers would come in and they would say, they don't have to be big, but they would come in and they would say, we need a high performing team. That's what we need. And I see a lot more failures than I see successes. And, you know, sometimes I think there's a confusion between high performing and burnout, where we take the heroic efforts of the few and we just drive them into the ground. We give them everything because they're phenomenal, right? If you've got a really high-performing person, and I would actually say Dale and Martin in particular are high-performing people, Nick, watching them in action, you have to be careful not to burn them out. So I think that's different to high performance. Am I correct? And what's your definition?
Well, yeah, I mean, high performance, I look at it from, you know, teams and how well they're doing, and it's funny, these leaders, these managers come in and say we want a high performing team. Very rarely does that happen. All the research would suggest that 10% of teams are high performing, 50% of teams are average, and frighteningly 40% of teams are dysfunctional. However, the big thing is a lot of teams don't know in which category they fall into because they don't measure their team performance. You know, I come across a lot of teams. Well, an example, I was speaking at a conference in Singapore at the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, and it was a project management conference. There were 600 delegates there that I was talking in front of. And just out of a show of hands, I said, how many of you actually measure how effective your teamwork is? About 1% of hands went up, so about 60 people. So one of the things is that project teams don't tend to measure their teamwork. What they do measure is their KPIs. You know, the old triangle, the cost, quality, time triangle. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that a lot of teams are actually driven by. So they measure their KPIs, but what we've got to remember is those KPIs are actually driven by the performance of team members. So if you don't know how effective your teamwork is, how do you know how much better you can do in terms of your KPIs?
Yeah, 100%. And KPIs being those outputs, I guess, yeah, most projects are the same, aren't they? They haven't really changed much, especially in the last, 20 years since I've been doing them. And you mentioned dysfunction as well, and the measure of, and I think that's a really good point to take, is how do we know we're performing, which is probably my follow-up question to you, Nick. Is there some things you've seen that have worked in terms of how you would measure teamwork rather than just the output KPI metrics?
Yes, I mean, I've always been a curious person. So when I first went into a team leadership role many years ago, I started asking individual team members questions. And so, for instance, how good you feel is trust within the team members, or what's our communication like in the team? So I used to ask various questions of individual team members and started getting some fascinating answers back. So over the years, in all the different leadership roles I undertook, I started sort of developing these questions, and I used to write them down, discard the ones that I felt didn't work, but the ones that worked, that gave me a better insight to my team, those are the ones that I kept. And 9-10 years ago, I actually sat down, I had some time to sit down, and I looked at all these questions and started to categorize them, and eventually came up with a model that I called Team Dynamics, and it measures 16 areas of teamwork. So I licensed that. I worked in partnership with a company that produces behavioral profiles. So teams now are able to measure how effective their teamwork is across 16 areas of teamwork. So, for instance, purpose, which is for me, it's the most important element of teamwork. Does everybody know what our team exists to do? So it measures purpose, accountability, trust, collaboration, communication, team meetings. So it's a model where team members can actually score against statements, and then it will work out how effective or not your teamwork is. So that's the way that I come at teamwork. And obviously, falling out of that, you get some metrics to actually, when you look at various teams across different sectors or different disciplines like project management, you can start to benchmark how they match up against similar teams in terms of the sectors that they work in.
I saw in the 16 element model, we'll put a link in the show notes. It's split into the 4 colors that are used in the disc profiles. Was that deliberate? The green, red?
Yeah, and it's not just disc. It's a great question, Martin, because for 17 years I was a licensed practitioner of a company called Insights, and they use a 4-color model, exactly the same as disc. And then after those 17 years, for the last 9 years, I've used a color profile model from a company called Clarity 4D. They disc, Insights, and Clarity all use the same 4 colors, and all produce behavioral profiles, which are really valuable in terms of your own personal development. But when we talk about teams, they are really valuable documents in terms of who have we got in the team, what are our strengths overall as a team, but also equally what are our challenges. So yes, you are spot on, Martin, with your observation. The team dynamics model has 16 elements, 4 in each of the colors. So there's 4 red, which are what I call strategic actions. Then you've got the blue, which I call framework mapping. So those areas are things that you map out, and your processes and your procedures, the roles and skills that people undertake. Then you've got coactive connections, which is all about people, which is about How good is trust in the team? What are our team meetings like? And then you've got the interactive collaboration, which is all about moving the team forward. So it's about how good are we at transforming our team? How good is collaboration? What's our communication like? So yes, you're totally spot on. Yeah. So it does link to the behavioral profiling. The reason why it was just pure chance that happened when I looked at the different questions and the categories started coming to me, and I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, they link in with these 4 behavioral colors. So with the teams that I work with who have been profiled and know the color model, actually using team dynamics is just like falling off a log. It's so easy to use because they get it, they understand it. Yeah.
We had a really interesting experience when we did it as a team. So the collective 3 of us working together, we decided to do an insights, because that's what I think it's pretty well marketed, right? So it was the one we did.
Yeah.
And once we did it, it was great. We had some challenges in the team, I think, because of the size of the team and the pressure of the project and the pressure from clients, etc. So we thought it'd be a good exercise to bring everyone together. We had a lot of new employees, a lot of new staff. And I think Dale and I were talking about how we could use this as a way to communicate with the organization. And Dale put together this great organizational chart where we had the insights on each person within the team, so that if you were going to engage with a person, somewhat you could use that as a predicate, not necessarily every day, but it was some kind of guidance, I guess, of preference for each person from a dynamic, from a personality perspective. And then you had, I love this bit, which is you had them on a good day and then you had them on a bad day. Yeah. And that was on the back of the org chart. So for me and Dale, we were reds, which is surprising. But we would obviously have good days and bad days. And I think that was really useful because it was a bit of fun. It got the team talking to each other. Oh, you're a blue, I'm a green. I think we only had one green person, and that was I think it was Craig or something like that. So we use that as a metrics to, one, get people to engage. Oh, I think Martin might have been a green as well. Sorry, Martin. And no surprise there either. And I think we used it as a way to bring people together. And it was almost a talking point, It was like everyone got the matching tattoo. We all had clubs then to assign ourselves to. My question is, I guess, from that perspective, do you think sometimes when we provide the profiles for people that they fit the profile rather than become their true self in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I've I've been working with profiles for about 27 years now. And I've only come across 2 people that have basically what I call fudged it. I knew as soon as I saw their profiles, because I was aware of who they were, I'd met them, that it wasn't them. And there was one particular instance. It was a woman. She was a leader, and at the workshop, I'd spoken to her beforehand. I'd had a video conference call with her to understand what the objectives of the training were, etc. And when her profile, I produced a profile and I looked at it, I thought, there's something wrong here. This isn't the person I've seen on screen that I've talked to. So gave out the profiles and said to people, right, start reading the overview. Sit there quietly and read it, and then we'll discuss how you feel about it. And she burst in tears. And I thought, have I put my foot in it? Have I said something, which I can quite often do? But no, I took her to one side, and she said it doesn't read like me at all. She says it reads like I'm a really hard, nasty person. And I said, okay. I said, and I'm aware that is sort of not the person that I've seen. So I said, can I ask you? I said, were you under pressure when you actually did the evaluator? And she said, she nodded her head. She said, I was under a lot of pressure at the time. I said, did you do it late in the day? Was it early morning? What was going on? And she looked at me and she said, I have to confess, I didn't actually do it. I didn't complete the evaluator. I said, oh, that's interesting. So you didn't complete the evaluator. I said, so who did then? She said, my 2 teenage daughters. And then the penny dropped, because she was a lovely person. She had a lot of green energy, but you could tell she was under stress at work. So going back to what you were saying about our bad day behaviors, her 2 teenage daughters didn't see the lovely, caring mum. They saw the mum that said, unload the dishwasher, do the washing,
to take charge,
make sure your bedroom's sorted out. So they saw her as this bad day red. So it was absolutely fascinating when we had that conversation, and she redid her profile, and lo and behold, she came out as being dominant green.
Well, that's
so
interesting
yes,
as well. Yeah.
So you can get people, but I must admit, I haven't seen it, experienced it that many times, and I've profiled probably 3, 4, 5,000 people.
Wow.
So it's a very small number that do try to be somebody that they aren't. And the thing is, they're only fooling themselves, because these, as you said, the profiles are wonderful personal development documents. But if you actually don't complete them as who you are, you're going to get a document that's absolutely useless.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a value set to it, but it's not the only thing for performance. I think it gives a good baseline, as you said, to measure something, and then we need to do something about it. So just moving back to performance, I think I'll call out the elephant in the room. Trust seems to be, for me, the underpinning value or attribute maybe for starting to build not even a performing team. Let's just call it a team to start with before we give it any moving features. But I think if you don't have trust, you don't have a team. Do you agree with that, Nick?
Yes, I agree, but I disagree with the fact that trust is the most important thing. You'll read that there are a lot of books out there that say that trust is the most important. I challenge that. I say purpose is the most important thing. That if you're going to build a high performing team, you need everybody in that team to understand what your team exists to do, what that enables, and what are the benefits that fall out from that. If you think about, you've seen a job in a new team, you look at the job spec and you think, that's the job for me, that's going to motivate, that's going to inspire me, and that's going to challenge me. That's what you do. You don't actually think, oh, I wonder if I'm going to trust all the team members. That comes as a secondary bit. So first of all, you're actually joining a team because of the purpose of the job, or the purpose of what the team does. Once you get into that role, then yes, trust is important to start to build. So that's why I think purpose is the first thing. Trust is secondary.
I think you're right there with regards to personal values. If you've got a shit boss, and he's a shit boss, but the role itself is a good opportunity, it's working on something that you wanted to work on, you're willing to grit your teeth for a few years to get that experience, you probably would. But then I think trust as well is relative to your position in the organization. So if you are kind of just starting out and you're getting kicked by everybody along the corridor, it's probably not as supportive and probably not as productive for your future career, because you're going to go into another role thinking that's how it's always been. I've actually experienced that exact thing you said, Nick, we had very little trust, but there was a lot of purpose in that role.
Yeah.
And it was horrible, mate. It was absolutely horrible. But I got a lot of experiences out of it. One of the experiences I think is really important is resilience and the ability to manage your own state. I think these are really good features. But okay, so we said trust is second, purpose is first, which is purpose is the why, right?
And it's getting that balance. Going back to the team dynamics model, there's what I call task and relationship elements. So purpose is a task related element. It's to do with moving things forward. It's about deliverables. Whereas trust is about relationships. And it's getting that balance between the two, because quite often, historically, teams, and it's as I said, it's historical, it's to do with the economic times that we were in, but a lot of teams were driven by task and had this imbalance with relationships. So what you mentioned in your experience was probably that sort of case where you know, profits are put before people. And certainly certainly in the last 10 years, I've seen a change in that, where there is more of a balance and more of a recognition that, you know, if you want to be successful, if you want to deliver your goals and your objectives or make profit or whatever it is, the only way you can do that is through people. So I've certainly seen a change in leadership styles. Certainly, as I've mentioned with the facilitated sessions that I do for major projects, I've seen leaders now starting to realise they've got to have that empathy, that integrity, the honesty and trust. So yeah, it has been a change.
I think you're right, Nick. You know, we had the old school managerial versus leadership. And for those that can remember, the old school of managing people was just to tell them what to do. It was not as inclusive, as supportive, as encouraging. Yeah, you still had, you know, visionaries and leaders who would get you to think about the purpose and the vision and the mission. But the way they would deal with everybody on an individual basis was, well, this is the job, get it done.
Yeah. And
I do agree with you that the world has changed. It has pivoted, and particularly in project management, where we do refer to leaders a lot more. I think there is a little bit of a shift, and that is hard for some people to deal with, the shift from manager to leader and what that might encompass. And maybe we can talk about that in a sec. I just had one more question, and we'll get Dale in there because I know he's chewing at the bit to ask you a few, and you're doing great, Nick. So really appreciate your time.
No worries.
You mentioned before around communications. So one of the challenges I think in performing teams is misinterpretation or miscommunication.
Yeah.
And, you know, emails definitely didn't help. I think the remote working of Teams is helping a little bit, but it's still hard to read the room, if you know what I mean. If you've got a room of 8 to 12 people, how do you all communicate the same language? Do you have experience or tips that could help people who struggle to communicate or have had those same kind of misinterpretation events?
Yes, I know. The simple answer is, if you're communicating to more than one person, which if you're a leader of a team, say a team of 10, that's what's going to happen. So certainly if you've got your behavioral profile, you actually know what your communication style is. So the red, it's about, I will communicate in a way that is about action, goals, targets, deliverables. The yellow communication is about motivation, it's about inspiration, it's about giving them that wow factor. And also the yellow is very visual in its communication. Green, if the people who lead with green, it's about people centric, it's about making sure everybody's on the same page, there's consensus of opinion, and that we focus on outputs for customers and for our team. And the blue wants the detail. They want the Gantt chart, they want the Excel spreadsheet. So as a leader, when you communicate, you've got to recognize these, and when you communicate, you build into one communication elements of each of these different behavioral styles. So it's so simple, but it's so effective. I've been working with an organization for 3-4 years, and I was invited to their annual conference. And the director, who was in charge of, it was a directorate of 200 staff, stood up on stage for 1 hour to communicate with the team about what was going to be happening in the next year. And after he'd spoken, there was a coffee break, and I went round to just a selection of staff and just said, how do you find James as a director? They said, all of them said, fantastic, best director they ever had. And I said, and why? They said, because he communicates with us in a way that meets our needs. And when he was on stage, as I said, he was on stage for an hour, but all he simply did, he led with green energy. But you wouldn't have known, because he stood on stage and he started off and he said, 2016 is going to be an excellent year for us. We're going to go into these countries with these services and we will deliver success. So there's a lot of that red energy. And then all of a sudden he just switched and he said, it's going to be so exciting. We're going to build new project teams. He said, we're going to come out and create new products, new services, lots of ideas. So he switched to the yellow and he said, we recognize that some of you will need to come out of your comfort zones and develop and grow as individuals. We will make sure that there is the appropriate learning and development for you to be able to do that. So he switched to the green. And then he said, and if we get all of this correct, and on the screen, on the stage, he put a spreadsheet with the budgets, the forecast, the profit figures. And of course, that appealed to people with a lot of blue energy. It was, and it was just so effectively simple, just going around that color model. So going back to your question, yeah, in teams, there can be a lot of miscommunication. So I think you've got to educate yourself as to what your communication style is, and then work ways in which you can actually go round this color model to actually meet the needs of other people. And equally, you know, bringing this awareness to your team can be absolutely invaluable. You know, I work with a lot of teams where a simple activity of write down one communication do. So when you speak with me, do this and don't do this. So literally, team of 10, you've got an aid memoir, so that when I go and need to speak to Val, or I know that Val likes me to do this in communicating with him, but he doesn't like this. So it's sometimes it can be so simple, but a lot of teams do miss this because of the pressures they're under to deliver their objectives. And if only teams would take a little bit more time out to work on some of these areas, they would have even more success than they have at the moment.
Yeah, brilliant. I was just going to say, we've been talking about different colors and the color wheel. Is there any free resources that we can send the viewers and listeners to, just to help them get their heads around it?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly, I can make available sample reports, a sample profile for people to look at, also a sample team dynamics report as well, so that you can see how you can measure your effectiveness. So I'm more than happy to do that.
That's fantastic, Nick. We love free stuff on the Project Shadow podcast.
Don't we all?
So thanks for that. I mean, as we said, you know, the whole point of the podcast is to pay it forward. So really appreciate that gesture. I just want to rewind a little bit, because I'm going to bring in the blue side and go back to those stats you mentioned at the top of the podcast. 10% of teams are high performing. Only 10%. 10%. That means 90% are average or below average, right?
Yeah.
What sample size is that? How did we validate that data? How do we know that data is representative?
That was done by a company in the United States called the Mayer Business Group, and they, top of my head now, I don't know the sample size. However, they did a cross section of different sectors and different industries to produce those statistics.
Okay, globally or in the US only?
It was in the US only. But I've certainly seen, with the figures that have come out from my team dynamics model, I've seen similar sort of figures.
Wow.
So on the model I use, if the team's effectiveness is below 64%, they would fall into the dysfunctional category, or maybe challenged. It depends what team you're working with, because some teams don't like to be called dysfunctional. So yes, you can say that they're challenged. Between 65 and 85%, if it comes back with that score, then they're in the average category, and 85% and above, they're high performing. And certainly those figures that I quoted you from the Mayor Business Group, I've seen coming through in some of the stats that I've collated. That's
incredible. That's,
yeah.
We're not, perhaps we're not looking enough as a collective of how we're performing, and I think that's the point of today's podcast.
Yeah.
And the other thing you mentioned, I think, was only 1% of teams measure their performance. Only 1%.
Measure their team effectiveness. So they
okay.
do other things. They measure KPIs. You know, as we've talked about in projects, it's quality, time, and cost. But with your KPIs, they're a result of how effectively your team is working together. So if you don't measure how effective your teamwork is, you don't know whether your KPIs are standing up and doing well, or whether you could actually be smashing them out of the park,
Yeah, no, sure.
It was somebody years ago, and I dismissed it at the time because I lead with yellow energy.
Yeah.
So blue's quite a way down the scale for me. But I always remember a project manager saying data is king. And I dismissed it at the time, but now in reflection, being a little bit older, it's actually true. Because if you can measure something, you can understand whether it's working well or whether it's working badly. And if it's working well, you continue to do it. If it's working badly, you've got an opportunity with your team to say, what do we need to change to make it work better than it's working at the moment? So I think, a lot of teams, it's the fact that they don't measure things, or they don't measure the right things.
No,
have you got examples of how you do measure teams? Like what specific metrics, KPIs, whatever, would or could teams use to do that?
Well, the metric, in terms of team effectiveness. Yeah. I mean, the one that I know is the one that I created. So the team dynamics model. So basically, there are 48 statements that are totally randomized. So you don't know which of the 16 areas they fall into. Team members complete those based on their perception of the team. And their individual results are anonymous, but they're collated to form an overall team effectiveness perception. So then I can look and produce a report that says it holds a mirror up to the team's face, and it says, you say that trust is only 50% effective in our team. So what's going wrong here? What do we need to change? So that's where you can facilitate that change. Ultimately, the team owns the solution, because you don't know what environment they're working in, what services or products they deliver. But for me as a facilitator, it's because the word facilitation is from the Latin to make easy. So what I do is make it easy for them to have conversations, have discussions, create ideas, test out those ideas, and then ultimately, if that idea works for the team, implement it to make things better.
Let's play devil's advocate on that. Are you almost relying on the goodwill of the people to do those things, to do those tests honestly after a while, because it kind of feels like it's in your interest to say that you've done this piece of work and now we're improving, get them on a good day?
That's why the model was built with anonymous feedback, because it was felt that yes, there are some teams, let's be honest. Val talked about some of the leaders that he worked for. There are some leaders that are arseholes, you know, and let's be honest that if you give a low score, they will come and they will point the finger at you. You know, why did you put that score? Or some would even go to the extent of redo it and put that score higher. So by making it anonymous, it means that people are more likely to be open and honest when they complete it. And certainly there's some metrics in there that will show out of pattern answers. So it will show that 3 people in the team scored it 2, 5 people scored it 10 out of 10. But if you get 9 people scoring it 10 out of 10 and 1 scoring it 1 out of 10, then that's going to ring alarm bells. Yeah.
Awesome. Nick, now you know why Martin's called Machine Gun Martin. So there you go.
Yeah.
I just wondered then, can all teams be high performing? And let me kind of explain a bit behind that question, because in my mind, it's all well and good putting it through a model, and this is me, I guess, being a bit Machine Gun Martin-y, playing the devil's advocate. You know, it's all well and good putting people or teams through a model that outputs a particular score. But if you put it in context of an organization and one team is outperforming the other, then they would be viewed as high performing, even if they scored low.
Yeah.
So I just wonder around that whole contextual conversation, how that comes into play in terms of an organizational as a whole.
Yeah, I think with the organisation, you're right. There could be a team that is deemed high performing, but actually scores quite low, and that's the beauty of having the data and the metrics, because you can say, well, yes, you know, you think you're high performing within this organisation, and people look on you as high performing. However, if we take your results and we compare them with sector norm, you may be 20 percentage points lower than the sector norm. I don't think you're ever going to get the perfect team. I think it's totally impossible. But what I say to people is, if you strive for excellence, you'll do some amazing things, you know, on that journey. I think there's too many factors that come into play to actually get to the point of a perfect team. I mean, Google has done loads of research trying to find, you know, what makes up this perfect team. But I think there's just too many variables. You know, you've got new team members coming in, you've got team members that are leaving, you know, new leaders, old style leaders. You've got the environment that you work in. You've got the economics. You know, what's going on economically, what's happening with your competitors and your products and services. So I think strive for excellence, but I would say excellence is impossible to achieve within a team. And you can get close. You could probably get really, really close, but I don't think you're going to ever get to that point where you could say there is nothing else that team can do to actually be better than they are at this moment in time. I say to people, there is always an opportunity, no matter how small, to squeeze a little bit more juice from the orange. Yeah,
we'll keep squeezing. Well, we're squeezing you a lot. I'm sure we're trying to get as much insight out of you as possible in the amount of time given. So I was just thinking then, if we stick with the colors, is then close to we can't get perfect, but close to the perfect mix. Is it a mix of different colors in a team? Or is there a scenario where you need more of one color versus the other, where you need more of one aspect than over the other? And how do you identify that as an organization?
Yes, I mean, based on my experience, the the heterogeneous teams, so the ones with the different mix of people, tend to have the greater ability for success. And I say tend to have because they've got to value and appreciate those differences. So that's the key to it, is if you value and appreciate those differences. So homogenous teams, where you may have a propensity of one behavioral type, you get a particular groupthink that goes on, and therefore they will struggle with maybe thinking and making decisions in a balanced way. For instance, I was working with a team. One of the psychological preferences that we all have is how we make decisions. Some people make decisions through a thinking process, so very logical. It's about objectivity, it's about ticks in the box, it's about gathering data. And the other preference is what we call feeling. And people with a feeling preference, they make decisions based on emotions, relationships, and harmony of those relationships. And I was working with a team where there was almost an even split between the thinkers and the feelers. And they were talking at the coffee break that their organization had to reduce their parking spaces by 25%. So after the coffee break, again, it was totally unplanned, but I like to work off the cuff. And I said, okay, let's just get you into the two groups. So 25% of your parking spaces are going. What I want you to do is in your two groups, just come up with how you are going to make that decision. You know, what are the things that are really important in making that decision? The people with the thinking preference, because it was all about facts, data, information, and being objective. They talked about needing to find out length of service of people, because they thought they might, you know, the longer the loyalty for being in the company, you would get a parking space. So it was length of service. Then they talked about seniority. Then they talked about mileage. How far people were away from the offices. So all very tangible, hands-on, measurable things. The feelers, they talked about having to find out if anybody had any disabilities where they needed to park close to the offices. They talked about parents who had to do school runs. They also talked about was there the opportunity for car sharing with people who live close by. So let's find out where people live. So totally poles apart in terms of gathering that data to make those decisions. And that's what you've got to be careful of when you've got these teams with a propensity of one behavioral style, because they won't think in the style of the other people. So that's coming back to your question. That's where I think heterogeneous teams have a greater ability to be more effective than homogenous. But you do get situations where you do need a particular strength in one area, but quite often that's few and far between.
Okay, that's interesting. It's almost, I mean, I like to liken these things to sports, where you have a team that, you know, is flexible, has a full array, and can be adaptable. But at a certain point in time, you need certain players to play against a, you know, certain other team because they have certain strengths. Just one more from me before I bring Val back into the equation. I'm just wondering, with your questions that you've developed over, you know, these many years, do you constantly tinker with them, or have you come to like the perfect set of questions that you've got today?
Yeah, I constantly tinker with them. If I feel there needs to be a tweak that would make a question even more effective than it is, then that's what I would do. And again, I'd obviously test that out before putting a change live, so to speak. Yeah. So they're never set in stone, because, you know, the workplace is constantly evolving. So sometimes those questions that, you know, worked well 5 years ago may not work so well in current times. So yes, I mean, I'm always reviewing, looking back to see if something needs to be tweaked slightly to make it even more effective.
Hey, Nick, I was just wondering, with performing teams, let's just go back to the why, because you mentioned that was, you know, the purpose is important, the why is important. From your experience and your observations, is there a direct correlation between, and there should be, right, between high performing teams and project success? If we take those traditional metrics of, you know, cost, time, quality, are we seeing the transfer of, because I'm just wondering if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, I want a high performing team, but they don't really know why they want a high performing team. It just sounds good. And maybe it is. Maybe you score really, you know, we can't help ourselves but mess around with measures. If there's something to measure, we want to tinker with it, right? It's just the nature of human beings. But have we seen, or have we got anything in the market we can see and said, well, there's an example of a high performing team and then a high desirable outcome of project successes? Have you seen that correlation in your experience?
I've seen it, but not specifically in the world of project management.
Yeah, so you can have.
I've seen it. I've seen it in operational teams where, you know, they have delivered against their KPIs. They've done extremely well against their objectives, and then you look at their team dynamics report, and, you know, they're scoring 85, 86, 87%. So the whole of the team is upbeat about how they perceive their team effectiveness. So you can get that correlation between the results they get for the organization or against their team objectives as to their perceived team effectiveness. Yeah. So I've seen it in operational teams. I haven't had the opportunity to see that in fruition in terms of a project team yet.
Yeah, and I agree. But you mentioned data is king, and we had Martin Paver on before, and he would absolutely agree with you. Maybe you guys can hook up. But one of the challenges is just understanding where we are. You know, it's great to have a map of the territory, and if we could understand exactly what the benchmarks from a profile perspective were, and that was anonymized, we had project data that was anonymized, and we could somehow bring that data together, we become far more scientific as a project community. We can understand different angles. So there's always going to be a people element to the story, there's going to be a process element to the story, and there's going to be a technology element. There's also going to be political and geolocations and technology. You know, there's going to be all these other challenges. What I find challenging in the project space, even from a data perspective, because I love data, Nick, is the ability to draw conclusions from data that's been shared by projects, because there seems to be so much mismanagement of it. And I'm wondering how we can improve that. And I know Martin Paver from a I guess a digital solution perspective, he's looking at unboxing some of that for government projects. How do we look at projects and learn from the past and apply that to the future? That's what we want to do. And if robots and machines can help us get there, why wouldn't we take advantage of that? I'm thinking the same thing for not for profiles, not necessarily colors, but definitely for high performing teams. How do we box that up and ship that behavior or that dynamic to the next team? Have you been asked that before?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is education. It's understanding. You know, I've worked with in one organization, I worked with 4 different sub teams. So they all came under the same directorate umbrella. But they undertook team dynamics in the 4 sub teams, and that actually enabled us to compare and benchmark against each other, because they all had a common purpose and a common goal that was just a bit further up the chain from them. And that can be quite fascinating, because it can unlock issues that one team has got that the other one hasn't. So then you can get the education by, well, what is that team doing that one isn't, and how can we apply what they're doing over here to what this team is doing over there. The other great thing is when you use it across a section of teams in the same organization, this organisation, it highlighted that their planning process, all 4 teams scored planning really, really low. So what we were able to do then is say, okay, we've got the data now that says that planning causes a bit of an issue. So let's take it up to the next level in the organisation, and let's go and speak to the planning team to find out, or let's speak to the sub-teams first of all to find out what their real bugbears are with planning. Then we can take that data and information and go to the planning team that sits above them, that controls the whole of the planning process throughout the organisation, and say, hey guys, girls, you've got an issue that is causing your teams underneath you a massive headache. So what are we going to do about it to actually rectify that? So I think, again, it boils down to having the data and then using that data to educate other people and then make informed decisions on what you need to do as next steps. So it may be localized within the team that you can do something different. Equally, it could be an issue that's organizational wide, that suddenly, because of the data, you can see it in front of you, and then you can take it to the next level to get some changes made.
Yeah. I had one more.
Ultimately, it's education.
Yeah, I think that's great as well. We talked about a lot on the pod around just educating and self-education too. You don't need to wait for a company to tell you what to do. You can go out there. The internet is amazing. I had a question around equality as well, because this comes up a lot. And I don't know if you've experienced this question, but there is a push to have 50% representation of both sexes. And I think there is a challenge with how, well, actually it's a question around preference. So as well as whether that has an impact on moving the needle, because there's an argument that, and I don't know the answer to this, there's an argument that diversity of thought creates better teams. Great. Yeah. Let's have diversity of thought. My view, and this is just because I have a Chilean wife and a big family, is diversity of thought creates a lot of interesting discussions over a beer and Christmas, but it generally doesn't bring us closer together. But I'm just wondering how we've all had this, right? I'm just calling it out. How do we both tackle, okay, minority representation, very important. Inclusivity, very important. We all agree. Yeah. I guess the equality route, how does that have a play on team performance? The diversity of thought argument, does that still have a positive effect on the team, or when is too much too much?
So when you talk about equality, are you talking it from a psychological perspective or a male-female perspective?
I'm talking about the current situation where most organizations have a responsible kind of policy in place to have a representation of minorities and in particular women in leadership roles. I'm wondering how that has an effect on, from your perspective, on team performance or team dynamics. Yeah. Does it have an effect or not yet? Not known.
Personally, I don't think it does. I mean, throughout my lifetime, I've seen some great leaders, that lead with all different behavioral styles. I've seen that in both men and women. So there's been no difference. One of the greatest leaders that I worked with in the project management world, she was a woman called Jules. She was absolutely brilliant. She could be hard as nails sometimes, but she could be really empathetic at other times. But she had this ability to keep the focus on the project and the goals and what we were trying to achieve. I learned so many lessons from her that I've just released, published a book called Team Lead Succeed, and I've got some dialogue between myself and Jules that happened throughout the years that I worked with her. So I think the key for me, it's not so much the equality, is that person fit for purpose? Have they got the right skill sets to undertake the job that they're being asked to undertake? And if it's a leadership role, do they know themselves well? So do they know their style as a leader? And are they able to be adaptable to motivate and inspire their team members in different ways? So for me, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female. You know, the important thing for me, have they got the right skills, both behaviourally and technically, and are they able to motivate and inspire a team to move forward and meet the goals of the project or whatever they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, that's great. I agree with you there.
On the flip side, you know, probably like you were saying, Val, you know, I've come across some shocking leaders. However, those shocking leaders have taught me some great lessons in how not to lead, which has been good. And I actually mentioned that in the credits in my book. You know, to all those bloody awful leaders, thank you very much for the lessons that you've taught me, and the recognition of, as a person, who I don't want to be like.
100%. I agree. It's like bad parenting. You can have two bad parents and still be a good person. And then you can turn around and you can say, for everything bad in my life, it's because of them, right? You can blame them, but then you also have to blame them for everything good in your life. And for me, being positive about a situation has always been. We actually had someone on the show about Casper talking about positivity in project management and having that resilience to look at the glass half full type thing. And I agree with you there. I think every experience on a project, neither right or wrong, people make mistakes. We try our best within a very time and cost pressured environment. It's not necessarily for everybody. We understand that. But I thought, you answered that question very, very, very well. It's a hard question, and I don't know we all know the answers yet. It's just something that's evolving, and I had an idea about it.
Yeah, and I've one of the quotes I've put in the book is that those teams that learn from their mistakes are the teams that become more resilient. And it links in with what you've said. I get some people come up to me and say, "Oh, bloody hate my job. I hate the team that I work in. I hate this, I hate that." And I say to them, well, it's no good moaning to me because I can't do anything about it. If you want to change something, you've got to take positive action yourself.
Exactly.
But we do get people in life that are just life's moaners. And, unfortunately, they'll just have to carry on moaning unless they take action to do something and change it.
There we go. Mona's, you're a notice. I think there's a Mahatma Gandhi type quote that comes out after that, but I think you're right. You got to take the ability. You got to be the change you want to see in the world, I think is what I'm trying to say, and I think you're right. I had another one as well in terms of team dynamics before I hand over to Machine Gun Martin around the biases in projects. We see, you mentioned groupthink before, but there's a whole bunch of different types of biases: confirmation bias, uniqueness. How do we bypass the biases when we talk about team dynamics? Because I feel like there has to be, as you said, a purpose for all of us gathering together. We're being paid salaries to execute a project that can be difficult. Arguably, it's not always revealed at the start, but it certainly is once you are after probation, you're in there, you're neck deep in it. How do we then navigate the biases, and particularly around decisions? You've seen some of the horrible news about projects blowing out and costing taxpayers millions and billions of dollars. How do we stop that? How do we actually turn the needle with team dynamics?
I think the biases quite often, again, it falls back to education. I think with certainly with team members, I think you've got to get to the point of I call it having two paradigm shifts. So I say to teams, we are all different as human beings. There are some people that we are going to warm to. There are other people that are going to get right up our nose. Yeah. However, we've got to have a paradigm shift so that we don't see people as difficult. We see them as different to us. So just behaviorally different. And the second thing is we all do things in a different way. We've got our own style, our own way of working, our own way of communicating, making decisions. So the second paradigm shift is we shouldn't see people as we shouldn't be frustrated by people. we should actually be fascinated that they do things in a different way to us and quite often get the same or better result than us. So I think that's one of the keys that I say when I'm working with teams is you need to have those paradigm shifts. People aren't difficult, they are just different to you, and you should be fascinated by the way they do things rather than frustrated. It's a challenge, though. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
You know, I'll hold my hand up. There's, you know, there are some people that you may look at in a more negative light. But if we can keep that in our heads when we come across that situation that sparks a bit of anger in us, you know, if that can rise to our consciousness to say, hang on, let's not be angry, you know, they are just not being difficult, they're different, and I shouldn't be frustrated, I should be fascinated. That is part of the overcoming the battle, overcoming the challenges.
Yeah, well, you said this at the start of the pod, you know, you said kind of have the curious mindset, because that helps you just wonder a bit more about a person's behavior, even if it's not positive. You know, everyone's seen that slide that comes up with an iceberg, and you see this kind of 10% of a person's personality. You have no idea what's going on in their lives.
No.
And they could just be having a really poor time. And I think COVID certainly gave us a glimpse into some of the mental health challenges that countries are facing right now. And so, yeah, I do agree with you there.
It's fascinating, Val, you were saying about that. I was working with a global leadership team in Madrid 3 weeks ago, and they've got a new leader in the team. And I went out for an evening meal with them, and I was just chatting to some of the other leaders about this new overall leader. And they said, this guy is a breath of fresh air, because the first thing we do at every team meeting is he asks the question, how's everybody feeling? And, you know, you're talking about, you know, mental health issues with the pandemic, actually working from home, etc. And they said it was just incredibly enlightening, and they said quite inspirational that they could have that conversation. They chatted maybe for 15, 20 minutes amongst them just to understand where people where they were on how they were feeling. And then there was support from other people if somebody had a particular issue. There was support to hand, you know, they were readily available. And then they used to get down to business. So starting to look at the projects and the milestones and the goals and the risks, etc. And they said he's just got that balance right. You know, we've all got to be in a good, positive mindset if we're going to achieve what we need to achieve for the organization.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think you can be pretty ruthless and pretty short with people if your intent is pure. I think something around the intent and the frame in which you deliver it, you can still be very firm.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I'm thinking of my children now, trying to get them to bed. But, you know, you can be very firm, fair, and reasonable, but the way you present it can still be considered, you know, short and sharp.
Well, Val, there's a great trick. So I've got two grandchildren. They're 10 and 8 years old, and you say about getting them to bed. I mean, mine too go to bed; they're fine. But the psychological trick is that children like to make choices. So if you need them to get to bed, you say, "Would you like to go to bed at 7:30 or 6:30?" So, but you choose two times that you know either will work for you. So food as well, you know, I test it out with my grandson with broccoli. He doesn't like broccoli, so you just say, would you like 2 bits of broccoli or 1? Because you know that if he's going to choose the 1, but at least he's eaten 1, then he's eaten 1 of his 5 a day. So exactly. With children, give them choices. They love to make the decision.
Yeah, it's just what they call that is the double bind, isn't it? The illusion of choice. It's a bit like what salespeople do with their appointments. Would you like an appointment at 5 or 2? You're going to pick one of them. I think. Thank you for your time today. It's been great. I'm going to hand over to Machine Gun Martin in just a second. I just wanted to think, you know, from your profiling experience, do you think you could profile me, Dale, and Martin just off the cuff? You've heard us talk for almost an hour now. What do you think we are?
What do I think you are?
What colour?
Yeah, that's interesting in terms of your colours, because obviously you shouldn't make snap decisions. We all leak out clues as to who we are.
True. You won't offend us, I promise.
And and there's been a lot of body language going on as well. Certainly, Dale, a huge smiling face the majority of the time that we've been online. So potentially a reasonable amount of yellow energy there, I would suggest. Val, the color that came out to me is probably a fair degree of red, in terms of the way that you ask the questions.
They're all smiling, so yeah.
Martin, again, interesting, because obviously I haven't. Martin's fired a few questions, but I haven't had a lot of interaction with Martin. But I just don't know whether him being more in the background might make him a little bit more introverted. So maybe the green blue, also the project management stuff with Turner and Townsend. Project management over the years, I've found that there is a lot of blue-green energy that is in the world of project management.
Pretty close, I would say. I mean, well, we haven't done one for a few years, but it's amazing how you can pick up patterns like that, Nick. And just after a few conversations, I mean, this is interesting for people who are listening. Maybe after a bit of time, bit of practice, they get conscious awareness of exactly, and even unconscious awareness, which is what you're trying to do that, but you get that understanding of people and you go, okay, they're kind of like this, they're interested in the detail, so you can kind of lean your communication style into that preference.
Yeah. And then you know, and ultimately this is why I wrote the book. You know, that it was actually the pandemic that gave me the idea. I had the idea in March 2020 when it was the first lockdown in the UK. And you know, I've been doing this stuff for 20 years. I've spoken at over 500 conferences. And when I've worked with teams or spoken at a conference, invariably people would come up and say, have you written a book? So I'd like to read more. And I go, no, I haven't. And they'd say, why? And I said, well, I'm too bloody busy traveling. And if you're going to write a book, you've got to dedicate some serious hours to writing it. And it's going to be that quiet time. So yeah, the pandemic gave me this opportunity I said, I want a legacy of what I've done over the last 30 years in terms of leadership and facilitating team development. And again, as we started off with, Dale, you talked about paying it forward. And I thought this is a great opportunity to pay it forward with my experience and knowledge to the next generation of team members that are coming through. So yeah, and it's been great. You know, it's been out 7 weeks now. It's already been flagged as an Amazon bestseller. It's had
fantastic.
It's had all 5-star reviews. So it's certainly hitting the mark in both operational teams, project management, and leadership. So it's great. It's a good place to be, and it's just, for me, it's giving people a voice. It's you going back to what you were saying, Val, in terms of understanding behaviors better. You know, I've got 4 chapters in the book that talk about our different behaviors and different preferences. So it's great that I'm able to share that with more people than I would ever get to see face to face, you know, because I just love helping people. You know, at the end of the day, that's what my career has been about, helping other people.
That's great. We'll make sure to put the links to your book in the show notes, so people can buy it. Hopefully, just before we wrap up, you mentioned earlier there was a shift towards leaders needing to be more empathetic and having more trust, compared to probably the more task-based approach of previous years. In your experience, has that been a forced change as a result of the pandemic, or was it always going that way? Obviously, where you're seeing people in their homes in a slightly different environment. Was it always going that way?
Yeah, it's been starting to happen. I would say over the last 8 years on LinkedIn, I've gone out every 2 years and done a survey, completed a survey, just based on those people that follow me and see the post, which simply I've gone out and asked the question, what are the attributes that you want to see in your leaders? So it's not coming from a leadership perspective, it's coming from staff who are led, or team members that are led. And certainly I've seen the shift, as I said, over about the last 8 years, and the ones that are coming to the top on a more regular basis, as I mentioned, is integrity, authenticity, empathy, and honesty and trust. They are the ones that keep coming up. Oh, the one that's come up recently, and the last time I did it, was visionary. So they want their leaders to be visionary. What are we trying to achieve in 18 months, 24 months time?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there tends to be, whilst there's some slight changes, there tends to be 4 or 5 attributes that I've seen on a regular basis come up time and time again. But that shift has occurred probably in the last 8 years. So I think we're getting more of a balance now to what we had with leadership in the past.
That's good. It's interesting how you see these shifts over time, and how things evolve in leadership and management. I've just got one more before we wrap up. It's been in the news a bit recently with civil servants. Do you think remote working is here to stay? And do you think teams are generally, in your experience, have they been better, the same, slightly worse remotely? And do you think that shift is going to change in a few years?
Yeah, my view is that there's nothing better than getting people in the same room together. You know, if you're going to create a really high performing, effective team, I think there's nothing better if you can get them all in the room, because you've got their body language, you've got their tone of voice, you know, the words they say, that's all in front of you. And then, you know, the environment in which that teamwork starts to be created, you know, with the social activities, you know, you can have the coffee, you can have the chat by the coffee machine, which, you know, if people are working remotely, working from home, you've got to get their diaries and schedule a Zoom call. It's no spontaneity in it. It is going to be a fascinating challenge, because I know that there are some people that, you know, they've worked from home and suddenly realised that, oh, in actual fact, I prefer this than, you know, getting on the train, travelling on the tube, and you know, getting into central London. I'd be quite happy just sat by myself. Whether that's to do with the preference for introversion and extroversion, you know, I don't know. I haven't got any figures on that, but I think that could be an interesting study, you know, because certainly extroverts get their energy off other people. So therefore, being in an environment in the office with other people around them, that works for them. Whereas people who are more introvert with a preference for introversion, you know, the green blue, they get their energy from themselves, so are more comfortable working by themselves, so they may not have so much of a need to be in the office with other people. That's only my thoughts on it. You know, I've got no data on that, but I think it could be a fascinating study.
Yeah, I suppose there isn't really much data now, just having that real shift over the last 3 years. So it's definitely going to be an interesting challenge for businesses and projects alike. So yeah, no, thanks for that. So just before we wrap up, we've got time for a little feature. It's called Fiverr. It's 5 quickfire questions all about yourself. So if you're ready, let's give it a go.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 1, steak, seafood, or salad?
Steak and seafood. I love surf and turf. So it'd have to be a combination of the first two.
Nice.
Yeah.
Not popular with the vegans. What are the 3 must-have behaviours you look for in successful project teams?
I'm not a vegan, so it doesn't bother me.
What are the 3 must-have behaviours you look for in successful project teams?
I think collaboration. I think that everybody's got to be willing to collaborate and share knowledge and experience. I think they've got to trust each other. As I said, trust is the second most important element. And the third for me would be commitment. That willingness to go the extra mile, especially if somebody's under pressure, one of their team members. Do they show commitment, or are they a 9-to-5 person that just walks out the door and sees somebody else struggling? Yeah, so those would be my top 3.
What's the one piece of advice for people new to the project management profession?
That it's like riding a crest of a wave. That sometimes you're on the crest of the wave, and quite quickly that wave can crash down, and you can be in serious trouble. So the key thing is to try and ride the wave. Interesting.
Other than your own, what book would you recommend to our listeners and viewers?
Oh, easy. My favorite is by John Cotter, and it's called Our Iceberg Is Melting.
Okay.
Because it's about a colony of penguins, and it's great because you can identify the different behavioral preferences in the different penguins, and they're working as a team because one of them who's into measuring the iceberg, a lot of blue energy, realizes that the iceberg is melting and they have to go and find another iceberg to colonize. So I think there's some great learning, and John Cotter is a big hit in the project management world. So yeah, I think it's a great book.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, check that one out. Finally, are leaders born or made?
I don't think they're I don't think they're born. I think they're made through their experiences throughout life. So yeah, I think those great leaders learn lessons from both their successes and also their failures. I think they are extremely authentic, and they know themselves extremely well, and are able then to adapt their style to meet the needs of others. So I think they're made.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
Nick Fewings, the pleasure is all ours. It's been amazing to have you on. You've written a book. You've now been on your first podcast. Thank you so much for allowing us to be your first. It's been amazing to kick the tires with you around all sorts of areas on this episode. We'd love to have you back. Hopefully we haven't squeezed all of the juice out of you. But thank you so much for sharing everything you have shared. You've been very transparent and open, and I'm sure the listeners will find it hugely insightful. We also have to give a massive shout out to Jono Norman for putting you in touch. Jono has been amazing to us, and thanks, Jono. But before we let you go, any final thoughts, Nick, you want to leave our listeners with?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with your listeners, and really I'd say wish everyone continued success in whatever they're doing, and just think about the people, and think about getting that balance between not just completing the task but also completing the task through building relationships.
Amazing. It's always about the people. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think that was great. I love the ideas, and it was good free flow. You're a pro, Nick. I'm sure we're going to see you on many more podcasts in the future, and I do look forward to getting a copy of your book. So thanks for your time today.
Pleasure, and thank you for yours.
Thanks all. So folks, there you've heard it. That's all the time we have. But remember, before you go, please do help us out. If you like what you've heard, share a link to this episode in your favorite social media and help us pay it forward. A massive, massive thank you once again to our guest, Nick Fewings. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.